My name is Daniel Lehnberg. I'm a product manager and I'm working on Grin. I've been working on following the project since early 2018 and been kind of just gradually taking up more and more of my time. And now I'm partially funded by the community. Partially funded by the community to spend a few days of my time in working on the project each week.
And can you explain what Grin does?
So Grin aims to be a privacy-preserving cryptocurrency that is scalable, that scales better than some of the existing solutions that are out there today, and also fair in its distribution and in its setup. It's community-driven. There is no company or no foundation. All funding the project has is from donations of the community. It's run like any open source project basically, and governed the same way. There's no ICO. There's no pre-mine. There's no funding of the effort from the coins themselves. So we rely solely on the donations from the community to fund the work.
So to start from the beginning, Grin is, I guess, quite heavily focused on privacy. At least that's how it's understood for the outside world. Do you think that's fair, and why are you focused on privacy as part of it?
So there are kind of many components to that. Grin wants to be a usable electronic form of money, and in order for that to work, it's important that the coins themselves are fungible, in the sense that one coin used by someone is the same as any other coin used by anybody else. In order to achieve that, the coins need to be unrecognizable from each other. They need to look the same. And therefore you require some privacy-preserving functionality to get there. So they need to behave a bit like cash behaves today in the physical world. And if you think about cash, a £20 note doesn't have a memory of who spent it before you. So that's kind of part of the reason why privacy is a big focus of the project.
That's interesting. Can you expand a bit more on why you think that is? Why does it need to be for the electronic cash world?
Why it's important to have electronic cash?
Why sense of privacy is important to fungibility?
So in traditional UTXO-based cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, in order to validate that this is a genuine Bitcoin that you have in your possession, you need to look at the transaction history of this coin. So if you have one Bitcoin, you need to go back and you look at the history of that coin, where it's been from the point it was created, when it was mined, as a coin-based reward. As part of that, of course, you leak a lot of privacy, a lot of private data, which transactions this coin was involved with historically, with which addresses, and so on. This makes one Bitcoin not the same as any other Bitcoin, because you have these tainted Bitcoins that might have been involved in crime or money laundering activities, or let's say terrorist financing, or whatever it might be. There was a recent case of some drug traffickers that were using Bitcoin to send money back to their countries. This Bitcoin is worth significantly less than a Bitcoin that was freshly mined, that has no transaction history, right? Actually, freshly minted Bitcoin are trading at a premium because they don't have a history, right? This is the market basically saying that some Bitcoins are worth more than others because of this functionality. What we were trying to do with Grin is to have a system where every coin is just like the other. There is no difference between one coin that was mined 1 year ago and a coin that was mined yesterday, or a coin that was transacted before that. Instead, what matters is the people using it and how they're using it. Just like with cash today, if you think about it, nobody's really thinking about whether some cash was used in a legal activity or illegal activity. What matters is that banks and other parties are doing proper KYC checks, anti-money laundering checks, but the cash itself is agnostic. There's no kind of notion of where they've been before.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Just a small point. So I didn't know about newly minted bitcoins being worth more than all bitcoins. Have you seen those cases where people are selling newly minted bitcoins for?
So most of these will come in. I'll give you an example of my previous work. I've been working for a gaming company. And as part of the work that we were doing, we were exploring various use cases of cryptocurrency in our operations. So part of the regulation, some of the proposed regulation for Bitcoin and using Bitcoin in the gaming services, a regulation that comes from the Isle of Man or Malta, part of the requirements state that if you're accepting Bitcoin from a customer, you need to do KYC on the Bitcoin itself. So you need to run it through some of these third-party analysis providers like Chainalysis, for example, or Elliptic, that do intelligence on the Bitcoins themselves in order to receive the funds. So that's equivalent to saying to somebody who runs a supermarket that when a customer comes and wants to pay you for their goods, you need to look at the notes that they hand you, and you need to trace back through history and see whether they've been in places that makes it impossible for you to accept them. That's a lot of friction for businesses in order to transact with their customers. And so the people who are in need of buying a clean or freshly minted Bitcoin are those that have a need to transact with regulated companies without having these checks, resulting into negative outcome.
That's interesting. Yeah. And what about I thought you were going to say it was more of a return to Bitcoin. The idea of the need for privacy to create, like almost for a currency for an off-grid world.
Off-grid world.
As in, away from state surveillances. I guess Bitcoin was designed as a currency, privacy currency to stay away from the glare of the state, I guess. Do you think that's an important part for Grin as well? Or because the way you described it, I guess it's more you want privacy because that's just how money functions.
How cash functions.
How cash functions,
I'll say like this. First of all, I can't really speak for Grin itself because Grin doesn't really have a voice. It's an open source project, so it's really up to each of the participants in the community to kind of express what they believe is important to them. For me, personally, fungibility is very important in order to get to a place where you have electronic cash. I believe electronic cash is important to preserve democracy for the future. Not maybe today, but even today, but it's going to be more and more important to have an electronic form of cash. I can explain that later, but to answer kind of your question about protection from the state and so on, I think that is subjective to people's personal opinions about the political opinions about whether they want a big state or a small state, etc. Grin itself as a project, my impression of it is that it's quite agnostic to these things. There are anarchists in the community, there are libertarians in the communities, and the people who are not subscribing to those thoughts at all in the community, but they're all kind of work together for the benefit of this project.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit, it depends on the person. Some people will think that they disagree with some monetary policies of governments and so on, and they want to protect their cash from that. Others might want to protect from the state surveilling them. I guess it's different in which state you live in. I think one thing that unites the Grin community is the notion of being censorship resistant, right?
Yeah.
And allowing access to with those who want to be able to transact, and not having the reliance of a third party to give you permission to transact with the other. And that kind of also ties back to fungibility, because in a system where you can distinguish between one set of coins from another set of coins, then you can actually determine that, all right, these coins are not good, these coins are good, so we're gonna turn off access to the bad coins, or we're gonna prevent the bad coins from being used, and as a way you create censorship. And fundamentally, Grin wants to be resistant against that, and that's also why fungibility is important and privacy is important, but also a distributed system is important. I think a lot of it was driven by I don't know for sure, I can only speculate. Ignatius Peverell is the anonymous founder and creator of Grin. Just a few months after the Mimblewimble paper was published about a protocol, which Grin is the first implementation of, there was an anonymous individual who published the paper, and there was another anonymous individual, Ignatius, who then started the project. And I think it was this notion that what was being proposed in the paper was in a way groundbreaking, because it was combining separate technical concepts into one very elegant and simple blockchain protocol, and it deserved to be explored further and to be implemented. I think that's kind of where it started, from the technology, and seeing it as a kind of a better form of doing a UTXO-based cryptocurrency than what was existing before. I think that was like the original developers were I think driven a lot by development and kind of pushing technology forward. And I think this is still the case with Grin today, that we don't really believe that we're going to be the last privacy coin or privacy project. There's going to be improvements to what we're doing. We're just seeing it as a way to drive knowledge forward and progress. So fundamentally, Grin hides transaction amounts, senders and recipients' addresses. There doesn't exist any addresses on the chain. Very little transaction information is kept on chain, in fact. And you achieve this in a very simple protocol that requires interactivity between the sender and receiver, but very little data is kept on chain. Okay, that's one big difference from some of the other projects. Another is that the protocol itself achieves this by using very simple cryptographic assumptions. So there's no, the cryptography that Grin uses is tried and tested. The main cryptographic assumption is that the discrete logarithm problem is hard. It's no moon math. There's no kind of cutting edge, bleeding edge technology that nobody really knows how to verify or audit. Some of the other projects we've seen that there's been increased risks for bugs to slip in that could be catastrophic, and many times they've been like, so like one example is that there's been like a bug in a paper even that was implemented the way it was described in the paper, and nobody caught it, and only later did they realize that what the paper was saying was that it was wrong, and through scientific review it wasn't even caught. I'm not saying that Grin would never be able to have these types of bugs, but because the assumptions and the mathematics are simpler, the attack surface is smaller as well. There's no trusted setup, which is a big difference from some of the other projects. And the fact that we're not driven by a company means that there's no CEO, there are no investors to kind of placate and then guide our decisions. There are no company offices to raid from a hostile state or a hostile actor. There's no kind of get rich quick scheme by the developers or the community itself, and what drives us forward is the beliefs and the kind of the core values of the project, rather than some kind of backhanded motivation to make more money on the benefit of others.
That's interesting.
It's not resistant to price volatility, unfortunately. We would have, I think, personally, I would have loved if it could be stable. We just didn't figure out a way to do that in a way that isn't super centralized. But one way to deter speculators from going in purely for the price is the fact that Grin doesn't have a capped emission. So one Grin is minted every second. Grin is proof of work mined. There's 1 minute blocks. In every block there's a 60 Grin reward. So every second a new Grin is created, and that's the way it's going to be forever. This means that initially in the first couple of years the amount of the increase in the supply on a percentual rate is very high, which means that if you find out about Grin tomorrow, you're not going to be at a significant disadvantage from the person who found out about Grin by launch, because there's so many more Grins being minted all the time that there's a lot of Grin, and by design it's enough Grins for everybody, even if you find out late about it. Over time, the fact that it's 1 Grin a second means that the percentual increase is going to decrease. So after a long time of years, there's going to be quite a low percentual increase in Grin supply. But that's further down the path, and by then we're hoping also that the price is going to stabilize a bit more. They also are a Mimblewimble implementation, but I think that's the only thing that they have in common with us. They have their own separate implementation. They're written in C++, where our project is written in Rust, which we prefer from a safety and it just feels like a more modern programming language and better. They have they're funded by a company. The company has investors. They charge a certain percentage of all coins mined come back to them for the first period of years. So they're kind of for-profit organization doing for-profit development, and are centralized in their organizational structure. And they are the only ones who are building on the protocol itself. So they're more like, in a way, I think they're more similar to Zcash than what they are to Grin. And Grin is more similar to projects like Monero and Bitcoin in its structure.
So would you say you're interested in, maybe this is reiterating the same points, but would you say you're interested in this project, if not to earn money, you're not at Beam right now, are you here, is it for ideological purpose, there's an ideology that you believe in and that you think this is the way things should be, and do you think that's a value that maybe was lost in Bitcoin eventually, and that's what's driving this project?
It's a good question. I think from my personal reasons, I've been following the space since, actively since maybe 2014. Bought my first Bitcoin in 2013. Was seeing a lot. I was kind of sitting on the sidelines as part of the 2017 ICO craze, and I was seeing a lot of stuff there that kind of made me question the entire space and what it was all about. It was just kind of going crazy. And then in 2018, when I found out about Grin, it kind of came as a breath of fresh air, because here was this project that had some really cool technology, very simple and elegant in its protocol. Nobody was promising the moon, there was all kind of very pragmatic, and it was driven by this group of developers who were distributed and partially anonymous, that didn't really have anything to gain from the work they were doing, which was amazing to me. It was mind-blowing. That's kind of part of what lured me in, because clearly the people who were there were not working to try to kind of get rich based on some other people who could come later to the project, and that kind of appealed to me, because I'd been looking for ways to get more involved in the space, but I was finding it a hard time to relate to a lot of the projects. And a lot of the projects, they kind of come out and then they have a team founding team or whatever, that have clear benefits, to compared to other people who join later to the project. And this was instead designed to be very inclusive, which I think fundamentally, the more I thought about it, to me just felt like the right way to launch. If you're serious about doing this type of censorship-resistant form of electronic cash that's supposed to be accessible for everybody, this is pretty much the only way to do it, I think, and it very much follows the Bitcoin's model there, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think Bitcoin did it the right way, and it wouldn't have been successful as successful as it is today if it hadn't been doing that. But at the same time, Bitcoin has to be very conservative in its way of introducing new features and in its way of changing, and rightly so. And I think there are a lot of people in the Bitcoin community who feels that Bitcoin today is not changing slow enough. It needs to be more careful because of the potential impact that a change has. So I feel I was attracted to Grin because of the fact that it wasn't Bitcoin, and it could be more liberal in the way it was introducing changes, because it didn't matter as much. Bitcoin is a completely different beast, and what instead we're trying to do is kind of push technology forward a bit differently, with trying a new protocol, a protocol that might not ever see its way into Bitcoin. But we still believe that we can get learnings from doing that, learnings that at some point might be introduced into Bitcoin or might not, but in general it just feels like it's pushing the space forward in any way.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's a good question. I don't think I have an answer for that. I would say that Grin hasn't really been properly tested. The community hasn't been properly tested in the way that Bitcoin was tested during the Bitcoin Cash fork, during the SegWit debate. This is still, to come for Grin. I'm sure we're going to have these types of challenges. I think a lot of so far the fact that the fact that it's not easy for an investor to make a lot of cash short term by investing in Grin has benefited us, because it's kept a lot of the speculators away. A lot of the maybe people who are just in it to kind of flip it or whatever, they're really not going to become rich on Grin, so they're kind of kept away, which has helped us kind of get like a kind of a nice community going. But you're right, if Grin adoption increases a lot, then you're going to have a lot of conflicting views, factions, groupings, and it becomes harder to govern a project as a result. I think what we're trying to do now, we're currently in the process of iterating on our governance, where we initially just were the community and had a small technocratic council that was kind of taking some of the core decisions of spending and funding and planning. We're now trying to branch out and push out to sub-teams and create a more decentralized structure, where we encourage self-forming teams to kind of start picking up the pace and do work in community, ecosystem management, development, technical documentation, but have them self-form and kind of self-govern. Hopefully means that there will be more people taking responsibility for Grin and still allowing them to move fast, rather than having a very centralized structure with few people taking a lot of the decisions, because that doesn't scale well, and it might discourage other people from contributing. So there are 9 members of the council, which now, last week got renamed to Core, and we also have set up 2 sub-teams, one for wallet development and one for node development. These sub-teams are teams on Keybase. It's a end-to-end encrypted chat app, which anybody can join. And what they do is essentially, it's like a forum for discussion that related to wallet development and node development. Anybody can write a proposal for a substantial change to Grin, whether it's in its governance structure or whether it's in development or whatever it might be. This proposal is called an RFC, just the same way as a technical RFC is done in other projects. And RFCs get then managed by these sub teams that kind of shepherd these proposals through to get to a conclusion. And the idea is that basically we're trying to push decisions away from the core team. Core team shouldn't be taking decisions where they don't need to take decisions. So originally why the core team was created was to manage the multi-sig keys of the wallets that were receiving donations, and also help plan with releases and version planning. Now what we want to be doing is we want core to maintain the responsibility of that and also set year-long roadmaps and the kind of vision and values of the project, but then let other smaller teams execute on that, depending on each to their own for their own field. So if you want to do something related to community, you shouldn't need to ask for permission from the core team to do that. You should just kind of be able to be more self-starting and up and running faster. And if you want funding, you might request that from the core team, and the core team might give that to you. But then you're kind of allowed to run at your own pace.
But the core team will always be there.
For now, yes, because we don't have a better solution to it. It's hard in the sense that there are funds that are in these multi-sig wallets. They need to be managed somehow, and we can't let the entire community manage them. So it's a kind of tricky question. I mean, if we could, I think the objective or the ideal is to have everything as pushed out and decentralized as possible. The question is just how to do that in a way that makes sense. So first of all, nothing stops you. If you wanted to do it today, you could just do it yourself. You wouldn't even need to kind of come to the community and do it. But let's say you wanted to engage with the community, you would show up on our forum or on our Gitter channel, I guess those would be the best ways to do it. You would reach out there and say, hey, I want to do this thing. I don't know if you would need funding or not, but let's assume you wouldn't need funding, then you would just kind of reach out to the community and see who would be interested in doing something with you. If you need funding, you would submit a proposal explaining how you would use the funds and why it matters, and then there would be a discussion in the community about whether it makes sense to spend the limited funds that we have on that. There's been many situations. One example is a team from group of individuals from Amsterdam that wanted to hold a Grin event in Amsterdam. So they arranged a kind of like a conference for one day. They invited some of the core team for speakers. They were charging, they were selling tickets. The part of the proceeds were donated back to, they got some sponsorship as well. Part of the proceeds were donated back to the Grin donation fund. They ran a fantastic event. They had it live streamed in Amsterdam, and it's completely self-started from them, and we try to support them as much as we can. And I think that's kind of the way to go about it, because managing this centrally wouldn't work for us as a project, because we're so limited in the resources that we have and the people and hands basically that we have, that we wouldn't be able to scale. So rather than this is kind of like some of my thinking for meetups and events as well. So I run the Grin London meetup with another friend of mine, and we just started it ourselves. Now if somebody else wants to run a meetup in Azerbaijan, what they could do is come to us and say, hey, would you want to come and fly in and speak and have a conference there? But that doesn't scale well, because there's only limited amount of time I can actually fly over or speak remotely. Whereas if they could have this chat themselves, then there could be other people doing these meetups all across the world. So what we like to do is to figure out how we can give the shovels and the fishing rods to people, so they can go and dig or fish themselves, and create these events on their own, and this way help us scale much better. At these meetups, you can then meet, some developers might come that are interested. Maybe they want to learn Rust, maybe they want to contribute to the code base, and the community and the project as a whole benefits out of that by us reaching out in a further way. In order to do so, though, you must be able to relinquish control, right? You must be okay with that. And this is kind of what I was part of my thinking as well. Like, I can't speak for Grin because I'm not like an official representative, because we don't have that, which means that everybody can speak for Grin. You can speak for Grin if you want. You don't need to ask for permission, and that's kind of, I think, what are the powers. This is kind of similar to how Bitcoin works, in the sense that nobody can speak for Bitcoin really. There might be a group of core developers, but they don't really speak for Bitcoin. They're just there's no kind of single voice for it, and that's very powerful because it means that everybody can get engaged and everybody can contribute whichever way they want.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, cool. So
if you counter that to some like your typical token project, ICO project, or your typical like company-driven blockchain project, they have a trademark of their project, currency, logo, whatever it is. They decide what the appropriate use of this is. You kind of have to ask them for permission, or they can come and sue you. And they have their team, they have their community managers, they have their marketing managers. They kind of set the agenda and the pace of the project, and you reduce the incentive for any third party, any observer that finds out about this project to contribute, especially to contribute without getting paid for it, because here you have all these other people getting paid a salary for doing this promotion. So what about you? Why shouldn't you be getting paid? Why should you be contributing to their open source code when they are in fact making money they're benefiting on your contributions? This doesn't scale, and I don't really see it as a way to achieve mass adoption. Maybe Grin on its own will never reach mass adoption. Bitcoin hasn't reached mass adoption either, right? Perhaps all the stuff we're doing is not going to be worthwhile, possibly, but I don't think the solution is doing it that way. I mean, that feels like a regression. At least this way, I think our chances are better of getting there at some point. We have a lot of challenges to tackle, and I think the only kind of way to do it is by being open and inclusive. It's a good question. It's a hypothetical scenario because we've never kind of experienced any of that, and I've seen some kind of Twitter scams related to Grin airdrops, maybe some stuff like that, but they're quite minimal. Fortunately, I think maybe we're like still flying below the radar, and because there's not speculators of other coins to kind of target, we're kind of left alone a bit. But I think you can have what you're describing with specific closed Telegram groups or closed chats and so on. These are private rooms, right? Private forums. You must still be able to have these private forums because it's up to you to decide how you organize. But as a community, on the community level, there needs to be an open platform where people can communicate. Whether that's the forum, whether that's our Gither channel. However, being open doesn't mean that you're not moderating. You have a code of conduct. We have a code of conduct. Moderation occurs based on the code of conduct, and we expect any participant in the Grin ecosystem to adhere to the code of conduct and to the project's values. And if they don't, they get excluded and banned. This is important in order for it to be a thriving ecosystem. Scammers will still always exist, but I don't really see that as I see that in a way as being inevitable, but we can only foster good community values by being by doing that ourselves and being like acting the way we want other people to act in the community. Now if somebody was actively targeting us, I don't know. I don't know what we would do, to be honest. I guess we would have to ban the people doing it and let people know that we're being under attack and hope that it goes away. It's hard, I guess, to kind of fend off that. But I don't think the solution is to become closed. But I think the way it works today. For example, Grin is not a democracy. It's never been a democracy. It's more like meritocracy to some degree, in the sense that it's almost like a proof of work itself. Your voice is listened to more in the community the more effort you've put in the past. You put in that effort by being helpful, by contributing, by being a good member of the community. So if you join today and if you start interacting, you're going to be listened to less than somebody who's been in the project for a long time. So over a while, you get credibility, you get respect, based on your previous contributions. And that allows you to be listened to more. Reputation. But this is not something that we formalize. It's more something that comes naturally, I think. And maybe with the sub-teams, this over a while is going to become more formalized, because we created the sub-teams partially also because we want a way to give recognition to a lot of community members who are doing a lot of hard work. So we want to recognize them. We want to have their picture hanging on the wall, kind of like it's not employee of the month, but like you want basically to say these guys are doing a great job and they should be recognized for it. And you know what, if you want to, you can also be recognized. If you put in the hard work, you'll also get recognized for that. We can't offer money, but we can offer you recognition. I think that it's actually more powerful than money. And this is exactly how our approach to governance is as well, in the sense that it's very difficult to get it right. I don't think anybody, governance in general, right? If you look at a political system, traditional political systems, nobody has like a perfect governance system. We have some stuff that kind of works. Sometimes they don't work, as we've seen in the past few years. There's always going to be conflict. And governance fundamentally is a human problem. So I don't think you can solve it with technology alone. And ultimately, everything that we do as a project is a human problem in the end. And it's humans that are taking the actions, doing changes, introducing changes. And we don't think that we have a good way of doing things. So we're trying to do as little as possible. We're not trying to over-design some technical solution for how we make decisions. We realize that it's going to be humans making those decisions ultimately. So no matter how much window dressing we do and throw on-chain governance with coin voting and this and that and the other, fundamentally there's going to be humans interacting here. So we're trying to keep things simple because we're not sure. We're not sure of ourselves, and we don't think that we have a good solution. And if we don't think we have a good solution, then we shouldn't be imposing that, because we might just create more problems than we solve for. So trying to stay humble in that regard. I don't know much. I think you know more than me. I go to more meetups probably around the world for Grin than I actually go to London meetups. I should be going more because I really want to kind of get to know more people here in London. However, I haven't so far. I've been to some events, and from what I've seen, it seems like London being like the financial capital of the world or whatever. There's a lot of like kind of finance people involved. Maybe less developers than you would see in places like Berlin, which seems to also be more privacy focused, more of a hacker culture. I'm hoping
there's more of a hacker culture in Berlin.
I think so. That's the limited impression I have, comparing the two. But I don't know. I don't know really how. I wasn't in. I wasn't hanging out in meetups in London during 2017 when the ICO craze was going. So maybe there was maybe things have calmed down now, and it's everybody's kind of focused a little bit more on building. But it's interesting. I think there's a lot of people who are interested in blockchain technology in London, and a lot of kind of great people, great engineers. I hear a lot of crypto teams are based out of here. So I think there's a lot of potential for nice community to engage. I haven't engaged so much yet myself. Generally, I think Berlin scene. At least it used to be was much more anarchist vibe, hacker culture, maybe original kind of Bitcoin style philosophy and ethos. Less of ICOs and token based projects. I don't know how true that is still, but I think it seems like it's taking much more of a it has like a bigger center of gravity from some of the like Web3 projects and so on being based out of there. Ooh, I think there's a lot of open questions that the project itself hasn't answered yet, and I don't think they have figured out yet. I think what they announced was impressive and an impressive approach to how to go about it. Just getting there, I think, was a major accomplishment for the team. They seem to be super capable, the Libra team, and getting a company as big as Facebook to announce something like that must have been very hard. I have many questions around it, how it's supposed to work and why it's better than a PayPal. But I mean, there's so many things that haven't been kind of clarified yet. So I try not to think about it too much yet. And I think from what we've seen from the Senate hearings and so on, there's also different stories and different narratives of Libra and the direction it's going to take that hasn't really been worked out yet. So I think it's a little bit early to say. I do imagine that in a future where Libra exists, I do see a very strong and clear place for Grin to coexist side by side. And I think it just kind of, in a way, validates what we're doing and why it's important. Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenges that we're facing is like, how do we get more people involved? We don't have. We survive and we die based on our community, more so than other projects. A lot of VCs and investors have always kind of criticized Grin's funding model because we don't have this dev tax baked in where we're kind of making money from Grin itself. And they say it's a tragedy of the commons where people can just decide not to contribute, and then everybody's dirt poor, and Bitcoin suffers from the same problems. I'd say that this is also, by design, this is the way it is, and we need a supportive community that is willing to contribute for free in order to thrive. And if we don't have that, it's not going to work. And if it doesn't work, then I guess it wasn't meant to be, and we couldn't raise enough interest for it, and that's fine. And we'll try again with something else. But that's our kind of biggest challenge, to make sure that we have a healthy ecosystem of not only engineers, but also technical writers, QA people, testers, marketeers who can market the project itself, event managers who can create the conferences and interesting events, cryptographers that can research some of the very advanced concepts that we're exploring in order to further the coin. We basically need people from all walks of life to get involved, and the challenge is to figure out a system that can motivate people to do that and get more involved and scale across the world. Bad bus.
Huh?